Please do.
Okay. Yeah. So good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for signing in for this live session this evening. For better visibility, we'll be turning off the comments for now. If you have any, should you have any questions, please send them in the question box at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to them at the end of the talk. I'm just going to go turn off the comments. Yes. My name is Riddhi Juna. I'm the founder of Aroha Montessori Center for Co-Learning. The team Aroha, which is Sindhu Panikar, Sudha Gandhikar, and I, are extremely happy and excited and are quite honored to be in conversation with Mrs. Uma Shankar this evening. There is a lot to say about Mrs. Shankar, but I'll have to keep my introduction of her very brief because of the timings. Mrs. Shankar is the director of the Indian Montessori Training Courses, Chennai. She is young at heart and aged in wisdom. She is a storehouse of knowledge and experiences and anecdotes which are absolutely inspiring and which have inspired many. Several of her students have shared with us about how one interaction with her has changed their minds about what their passion is, has helped them change their careers and follow their calling. Personally, I find her zest for life very, very infectious, and her attitude of never giving up and always ready to take up any challenge like this one today, very, very inspiring. Uma ma'am, thank you so much for so readily accepting our invitation to talk this evening. So I welcome you to this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nritujana, and for those very lovely words of introduction. Yeah, I'm not sure how. I'm blessed to receive such compliments from you and my other students. Montessori, like for everyone, she was the one who showed me the way to look at the child differently, and I think that has made my whole life different. And at this stage, whether it's wisdom or not, I find myself more and more passionate both about her approach to the child and the child herself, himself. And every day there's stories about the child that inspire me that I can't stop talking. So thank you very much for your introduction.
Ma'am, I think with over 40 years of experience, I think today a lot of us are going to gain a lot and learn a lot from you, for sure. So coming to today's topic, right health at the right time in the right manner. This seems to be somewhat of a very unique and one of the commandments of the Montessori philosophy. How, according to you, as an educator or a caregiver of a young child, how can we equip ourselves to understand the child and see what is the right help, what is the right time to give it, and what is the right manner in which we should?
Yeah. I think that is one of the, what shall I say, the strong statements of philosophy of Montessori, our approach to the child. The right help at the right time in the right manner. I will have to go into a bit of history here because how did Montessori come to this understanding? We say her first environment that she started for children was in 1907, that's more than 100 years ago. And it was started in Rome in a place called San Lorenzo, and the children were children of building constructors, and they were running riot in that tenement area, and she had got about 60 of them into the classroom, and she was trying out some of the apparatus that she had created. And within months of her, couple of months of her starting this, the teachers there observed that the children had become quiet, they were working with the material, and they were in fact choosing their own material to work with. That is the key point where she observed to say, how did the children know what was right for them? How did they choose the right material to work with? And this made her, the scientist in Dr. Montessori, wonder and replicate the same environments elsewhere with her students and others, friends. And the same phenomenon occurred in every environment. And therefore, we say around 1920, she wrote about the sensitive periods, which are critical periods of learning in a child's life, in the child's development, when he's particularly attracted to certain things in the environment. Maybe I'll talk a bit more about it later, but these are also limited in duration. So it's so important for us to know what the child needs at a particular time so that we can give the right help and know the right time also. So in fact, we have to be grateful to those children who showed her something unique that made her talk about sensitive periods. I would also like to say, just to explain a bit more about it, that it is like she understood that children go through different stages of development. We call it the 4 planes of development because the periods that she talks about are from birth to 6 years, 6 to 12 years, 12 to 18, and 18 to 24. So they are called the 4 planes of development. And she found that the child was different at every stage. His needs were different, the characteristics were different. And so she felt that you have to understand that the child is not the same. Child is different. And therefore, I cannot put the child in the same kind of classroom, the 3 to 6 child in the same kind of classroom as I put my 12 to 15-year-olds. And I can't have teachers simply lecturing to them. So the needs of the children are different. So just to give you some example, from birth onwards, we say they have the need to explore, they move around and they want to touch things, hold things, put things in their mouth, maybe they need to explore. And there is need for movement. In fact, current psychology, or even in the last 20, 30 years, people in the West have started complaining about putting children in playpens. And when I say in India, nobody knows playpens, at least I hope not. I think they are really surprised, because if the mother has to do all the housework, she would rather have the child in a safe playpen rather than wandering all over if he has started moving. But I said, no, maybe because of the larger family or help for the child, to take care of the child, we don't yet put them in playpens. So they need to move in order to explore also. And they need order. They love to repeat things. There are so many needs that we can, but some are very important. The need for freedom. Freedom to move, freedom to explore, and freedom to make choices. Most people think that children don't know how to make choices. Children do know how to make choices. They need love and security. What is security? That if I need something and I'm crying, somebody will pick me up and hold me close and comfort me. They develop trust and mistrust in the environment. So we have to be very careful to know the needs of the child. And to just give you an example of the characteristics, our children learn by working with their hands and senses. They have to hold things, not only see and hear, but also hold things with their hand. And they have to do activities. Through their own experience with the environment, they develop understanding, develop intelligence. So we say they learn through their hands and senses. So for this age group, we need to give them things that they can hold and do an activity and learn from that, which is what Montessori understood very well through her observations. And characteristic, as I said, is they just love repeating things. Sometimes at home, when you buy a toy and they like it, they will never give it up. Even if it's a soft toy, they'll want to keep it next to them while they are sleeping, while they are having a bath. They just don't want to give up on those things. Or some puzzle that they are doing, if they have mastered it and you want them to do a new puzzle, they'll want to say, no, I want that old one back. we see it in our Montessori houses of children, that children just love repeating the activities. And while repeating, we also see concentration. But this, for young parents, I would like to say, the first moment of concentration is when the mother's feeding the baby. And nowadays, doctors do advise mothers to pay full attention to the feeding. You need to concentrate, because the child has to concentrate to suckle and get the milk. And very often, if mothers are on the phone or watching something, in your head you're somewhere else. But I think we owe it to the child to pay attention to that beautiful moment of bonding, and that's the first sign of concentration. I think it's really beautiful. I think this should be. I'm sure it is taught in the gynecologists do talk to the about to be mothers to say that they have to be prepared for all these things. I think just to give you an idea, the 6 to 12 age group, their needs are different. They won't work by themselves. They need to work in a group. In fact, if you invite a child to say, I'll give you a lesson and show you some material, he'll say, Auntie, can I bring my friend? And maybe more than one friend will come for the presentation. They love working in groups. They have, Montessori calls it the age of imagination. That is the characteristic of the child. He needs to develop that. He also wants to know what is right and wrong. And all these things, when we don't pay attention to that. So when children go and complain about another child all the time, we say, oh, he's always carrying tails. No, but he wants to know how wrong was that the action done by a friend. Is it very wrong or just a little wrong? By our reactions, they will come to conclusions. So we have a lot of responsibility to understand these sensitive periods so that we can give the right help. Yes.
So, the sensitive periods that you talk about seem quite interesting. If you could elaborate a little more on those sensitive periods, and if, as educators and parents again, how do we recognize these in the child, maybe in the age group of 0 to 6? How does one recognize them?
Yeah, that's the crucial question. How do we recognize it? But just to understand these sensitive periods or the 4 planes of development, when I said that they have different needs and different characteristics at the various stages, I think we try to explain it that human development is not linear, like from small to big. So we talk about the life cycle of a butterfly, which all of us would have done it in school, in our elementary school, and many of you may have collected caterpillars in little boxes and put leaves in it, and then try to see the development of that caterpillar. So let's just look at it. The first is the egg, which is at the base part of the leaf, well protected, and then that's the first. Then the second is when the caterpillar emerges, a small one in the beginning, very small, moving all the time. The egg didn't move at all. The caterpillar moves all the time, eating leaves all the time. And the crucial point here that I want you to note is that nature has made this caterpillar attracted to light, sunlight. And so the caterpillar moves towards the light where the tender leaves are actually there at the top of the plant. So it gets its initial food from there. And as it grows bigger, I'm sure it can eat even the other leaves, because you find little holes in all the leaves of that plant. And they go fatter and fatter, finally, till one day they have become this beautiful pupa, which looks like a mother of pearl. Again, seemingly lifeless because it doesn't move. But hidden inside it is the life continuing to take place, growth, and then out emerges the beautiful butterfly. The pupa as well we don't know what it's eating or what it needs. The butterfly, of course, we have to wait for it to emerge, stretching out its wings. We dare not help the butterfly when it's coming out, because that will be disaster. And so we wait patiently for the butterfly to emerge, and then when it's beautifully stretched out in its lovely colors, it flies to the next flowering plant for its food, which is the nectar. And it cannot eat leaves, nor can the caterpillar drink nectar. So if you see, these are the 4 stages in the life cycle of a butterfly, where each stage, it looks different, its needs are different, its characteristics are different. The caterpillar moves and eats, the butterfly flies and drinks nectar. Each stage is so distinctly different. In fact, when we look at the caterpillar, we cannot imagine the butterfly.
Yeah.
Nor can we look at the butterfly and imagine what it looked like when it was a caterpillar. Similarly, this idea was propounded by a scientist called Hugo de Vries before Montessori. But Montessori is the first who connected this to human fundamental development. She said, just like the butterfly, this human development is also the child is so different. And so when I asked, when you had your baby in your arms in the hospital, and then you look at your 6-year-old, you can't imagine that both are the same. And your 6-year-old growing up and running and jumping and being very active and very confident of himself or herself, telling you, Amma, you don't know anything, this is what auntie told me, and all kinds of things. And then you have your 13-year-old who goes through their own hesitations and uncertainties, the adolescent or even the pre-puberty child. And at 18, they are adults. Maybe not so sure of themselves yet, but they are surer than they were when they were 13 and 14. In fact, they come across, I believe, I'm told recently that, Amma, there it is, I don't want to hear anything from you. I'm adult now, I'll make up my own mind. So they are so different. In fact, I keep asking, have you seen pictures of yourself when you were 10 and 11 and yourself now, are you the same? Most people will tell us no. So the Montessori says at each stage, at birth, the baby is born. At 6, she says it's a rebirth. It's almost like another child because she or he is no longer the same. They are so different. When I was a teacher, mothers have come to me when the child was 6+, 6.5, and said, I don't know how you're coping with her in class. She's extremely rude at home. And I'm finding it very difficult. Till now, I was her, whatever. She thought I knew everything. And now she says, why should I do this? Why should I listen to you? And she's so rude. Or you also do such things. So I tell them, well, they are questioning you as to why they should do certain things. So maybe we should encourage conversation and dialogue rather than branding them as rude. With teachers, it's simpler. They don't get into the rudeness so very easily. But even with us, they will ask, what do you mean by that? That's not fair. You're always partial to the other guy, and so on and so forth. So we need to have conversations because they need to know where they are going wrong also. So I think, so the sensitive periods, I'd like to say, having given the story of the 4 planes, I'd like to say that I said earlier, these are critical periods of learning. So now what happens? It is as though a spotlight is shining on certain part of the stage. You imagine yourself in an auditorium where you've gone to see a play or a dance performance, and the light goes on at one corner of the stage where you see the dancer. Though there are other dancers on the other side or on the center stage, the light is not on them. Our eyes are drawn only to the spotlight, and we see the dancer there. There are other people there, but we can't see them. These sensitive periods are like that. It's as though the spotlight is shining only on certain things, and the child's attention is drawn to that. It is as though the rest of the world, the other things are of no interest. He is oblivious to those. So he is only interested in this particular thing where the light is shining. So can you imagine that the child from birth onwards may have a special attraction to language.
Right.
And that's what is so appealing to him. He doesn't know. He's not saying, I'm doing language now, I'll do math later. No. Nature has provided him with that. And the nature has also given human beings what Montessori calls, again, it's her own discovery, is what she calls the absorbent mind, which is different from the adult mind or intelligence, if we may call it. Child is intelligent. I'm sure all parents will agree that your child was very intelligent from the moment she was born. From the moment she was born. That's what all parents like to say. Of course, your child is intelligent. But the absorbent mind is something like the sponge which absorbs the liquid from the tabletop. The child absorbs language. There's no discrimination that this is easy or difficult. Chinese children learn Chinese and we can't speak Chinese. And we say, oh, that's very difficult to learn. In India, in the South, we all may think Hindi can be learned or it's not so difficult. But most people in the North will say Tamil is impossible. We cannot speak. It's a very difficult language. So there's no easy or difficult. There is no discrimination as to good or bad. Small words, short words and long words, nothing. They can speak polysyllabic words. They can pick up any word that you use in the environment, they'll pick it up and use it appropriately. In fact, parents often say, I never say that word, ma'am. I never say that word, but my child is saying it. And so appropriately at the right time. And then as a teacher, I wondered, I had to say to the parent, nor do I say that word. So maybe he plucked it out of the air. No, so children will pick up any word. Then one child very beautifully, very sweetly told me, I said, this is completely unacceptable. You can't use such words in school. I said, where did you hear it? My uncle says it when he misses a shot when he's playing tennis. Now, this is an older child. So completely believable that as uncle said it when he missed the shot. So we told the uncle also, he is repeating this appropriately. Very young children will pick it up. Very young children will pick it up. Because when you're driving the car and the cyclist darts in, you can't help but say something. And then children will just grasp it. Yeah. So, and they will use it. And their vocabulary amazes both parents and... yeah. So we'll come back to language later, Nitijana.
Sure.
So as I said, critical periods and limited in duration. So we have to find that time and find what that child is sensitive to.
So this spotlight that you talk about, I think gives us a better idea about what a sensitive period is. And like you're saying, the spotlight also keeps changing to different concepts and activities and things in the child's life. So what happens?
No, 1 minute. You said, how do we recognize it?
Oh, yes.
I think I didn't answer that.
Yeah.
So often, observation of the child helps us understand what they are interested in. Observation, which is, in a sense, objective. We just observe and write it down as a fact. Even parents can write it down as a fact. Today, my child did this, and for the past 1 month, she's been doing this, or 1 week, she's been doing this. And then you get an idea of what she's interested in. The thing is, it has to be non-judgmental, because you want the child to do something different. In the current scenario of the pandemic, most parents are telling us children are enjoying helping their parents in the kitchen. And we've got photographs, children rolling out chapatis, sweeping, mopping, washing vessels, everything. Suddenly parents have discovered that that's what her child wants to do, wants to be engaged in the activity that she's doing. And thankfully they are letting them do it. One mother told me when she was ill, the child was making the dosas. He's not 3-year-old, he's 7-year-old maybe, but he's making the dosas. So children and parents have found each other in the sense of what interests them. So you watch a 1-year-old or a 15-month-old who's crawling or walking and going towards some object on the floor, instantly you will say no. But don't go, don't touch, whatever. They not only will touch, they will pick it up and put it in their mouth, because now you have seen it, you have held it in your hand, and what more? How to find out what is it? So then you may want to lick it. You observe, just observe and write, and then somewhere we figure out that that's what they are interested in. Most parents know what their children are interested in. They'll say, oh, you know, she loves this song from this movie, or she loves me to sing this song, Or she loves to be, sit out in the veranda too when I'm feeding her, because she can look at the trees or the birds or whatever. So parents do know, but their expectations may be different. Currently, parents may want their children to write and read and do their homework assignments, which ought to have another name because they're all the time at home. They don't go to school. School work assignments, maybe,
Right.
they have to do. And they would rather be making chapatis. So so our expectations should not be there, especially between birth and 6. If you observe your children and go along with them, go with the flow as it were, you learn more about your child. If necessary, you must maintain a journal.
Right.
Every day just write, today I saw her doing this, I saw him doing that. I think that's the only way to find out, Nitijana.
Yeah, that sounds quite doable. But yeah, it does take an effort, I guess, a more conscious effort. But let's say if some of us have missed the bus and have not recognized these in the child, or have missed observing these in the child. So what happens when these sensitive periods are not met with or are disturbed?
Then whatever the child does is branded as, he is given the bad name of being naughty, being mischievous, being disobedient, being stubborn, adamant, never listen, and we think, oh, children are always like this. It's not true. It's not true.
Right.
And so maybe for 24 hours, you say, I'll go along with the child and see what happens. This is I'm recommending for parents who with less than 3 years old also.
Right.
Definitely with 3 to 6. What happens if I go along with the child? Often when we go along with the child, life is simpler. Maybe I'll tell a little story, a personal story here. I love telling stories, so you have to stop
Please.
me when I'm
No. Please go ahead, ma'am.
My grandson, when he was about 4 or 5, he loved riding he had a bicycle with wheels. Maybe he was a little older, 4.5, 5. So one day he told me, I want to ride the cycle to the park. And I said, what nonsense. I cannot be responsible for you on the road. I can't go. So you just go down and play, I said. This great, we'll go down and you can play, I said. And I held him by the hand, and no cycle, nothing. We just went down and very unhappy, and little tears, and I don't know why we can't go. You're so difficult, like that with me. Whatever he could say, he said. And I was getting more and more, frustrated, because I was also worried about taking him alone to the park on the road. And then I could see him, frustrated and not playing with any kind of enthusiasm. So me, the Montessori party or Aji, I said, okay, come on. What do you want to do? I want to go to ride the bike. I said, okay, let's go. But before we go, let's have a deal. I said, I have to be next to you. You can't go faster than me. And you also have to follow my rules of staying on the side of the road. And safety is in my hand. So you have to listen to me. If you're agreed to do all this, we'll go. And first and foremost, we have to go up and change clothes, and you have to wear shoes and all those things which he didn't like. I said, you have to do all those things if we are to go to the park on the cycle. So he went back and he rode the cycle. I gave in to his desire to go to the park. I have to tell you, the rest of the evening was the most blissful evening between grandmother and grandson, because he felt he had to go along with me also in following the rules. There's a quid pro quo there. The children do realize, and much later, when he was a little older, when he was 10 or 12, when his parents left him with me, and I had told him that I'll wake you up only 3 times in the morning, 10 to 7, 5 to 7, and 7 o'clock. You have to get ready and be downstairs at the bus stop at 7:50. He did it for 5 days, Monday to Friday. Friday evening, his parents came back, and as he let them in, he turned and looked at me and said, now your role is over. Okay? no more listening to you. Now they are back, they can take over the responsibility. So I asked him, why did you listen to me? That's because I thought you would get really worked up. You will become agitated, and I didn't want you that. So I decided I would listen to you only for these 5 days. When my parents come back, you are no longer the authority.
Yeah.
I didn't mind. So children sometimes, when they feel we are being reasonable, often respond to us better. I think otherwise there's frustration, there's anger, there's what we call throwing tantrums, because they may not have the vocabulary really to explain to us why it's so important to do it at that particular moment. We can't give in to everything. I've given you 2 instances where it was okay for me to give in. But you can't give in. Supposing the child asks for an ice cream when she's unwell, then what do I do? So for my 3 to 6, I can't give explanations. They cannot reason. I can't reason with them. So sometimes it is a challenge being a parent and trying to tell your child that you can't have the ice cream now because you've got a sore throat or or fever or whatever. You have to be innovative and creative. I have to tell you, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what I did when I had mine at that stage. I have forgotten. It is a challenge. It is a challenge. But if you can go along with the child a bit, even if we don't know what exactly are the sensitive periods.
Right.
You haven't missed the bus at all of you.
Yeah.
Whoever is listening, I have to say to you that for your child, you're the best amma and appa, the best mom and dad.
Yeah.
They have no one else. You are the best, whoever you are. And therefore, you just have to learn to get along with them, and you will really have the answers in your heart when you realize what they really want.
Yeah.
And how and when you can give it to them.
So it's never too late. That's inspiring.
Never too late.
Yeah. So that brings me to what we were talking about, language earlier, ma'am. You did say we'll come back to it. Language, again, I recall reading it somewhere that it's probably one of the earliest sensitive periods in a child. So when, according to you, does language emerge? The sensitive period for language emerge?
From birth. From birth. And in fact, in science, they say even when the child is in the mother's womb, they can hear sounds of the mother's body's actions going on. They can hear. They can even hear sounds from outside, they say, but not pick up language. Very many mythological stories are there, like Abhimanyu and all that, or Prahlad, who heard all those. But in coming outside of mythology, I have cases where parents have told me that the child responds to the music that the mother has heard over and over again during her pregnancy, and she calmed down with that music, and the child later after birth also calmed down with that music. I have actually seen the instance of a child actually freezing mid-action or mid-naughtiness because that music played, and turned and looked at it, and that too the first strains of that song. But that was played to him even after he was born. Right. So I'm not sure whether it's only during the pregnancy period or even later. So he responded to the music in front of me that absolutely froze while that song was going on, as though it just washed over him and calmed him. Then when that song was over and the next one came, he went back to his other activities. So from birth onwards, we say they are attracted to human spoken language. The sounds of the spoken language are special attraction. The spotlight is there, and they hear and they absorb. And again, as I said earlier, the absorbent mind absorbs and doesn't learn. So children can learn multiple languages. Whatever language is spoken in their environment, they pick it up. Young mothers, again, mothers, if you remember having your baby at home 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and you or your mother or mother-in-law held the baby, and we talked to them or sang to them, and we say, what happened? Amma didn't give you mamu? Like that, we'll go on, and whatever shape I make my mouth, the child will also do ooh. And if I say aha, then yeah, like that. So the child almost spontaneously does the movements that we do with our lips. In fact, they can't, they don't even blink at times. They're looking at us so intently. In fact, I ask them, are you memorizing my face to draw it later on? Unblinkingly, they'll watch us, and the sounds that we sing and the lullabies that we sing. You know, the lullabies, if you think of it, in almost all languages, will go like that. So the tongue comes out and moves, and they are watching you like that so intently that they may fall asleep. So the language is, spoken language is very attractive, and therefore that's the first language. That is, the spoken language is what they are taking in. So if you have parents, both parents, mother from one state in India and the father from another state in India, if both are particular to speak their own language to the child and not a common language of English, child picks up mother tongue, father's language, and the local language and English in school. All 4 languages. The spoken language, children pick it up. And Dr. Montessori's grandson, who came years ago to India, once told us that to retain that language with us for lifelong, we need to be using that language and hearing that language till you're 12 years old. And ideally, in this, there's always an ideal situation which we may not get, is the father, if he speaks Malayalam, should only speak Malayalam to the child. And the mother speaks Telugu, only speaks Telugu to the child. So if you see that, when the child turns and looks at the father, automatically he'll speak Malayalam and to the mother in Telugu.
Right.
And to me in Tamil, because I am this local person who visits the neighbor, who visits and talks to him only in Tamil. My niece's son, father's German and mother's Tamil. He speaks only German to the father and his parents. And Tamil to the mother till he went to school and picked up English. In fact, once when I asked him, what did you tell Papa? Can you tell me? And he was absolutely blank because about 2.5, 3 years old. He didn't know there were 2 languages. He didn't know there were 2 languages. He just looked at him and spoke in German and turned around and to me and spoke in Tamil. So beautiful. They don't distinguish. They just absorb. So languages, I think an important part, I personally feel it's important to recognize is children learn the spoken language first. And therefore, we owe it to them to speak a good language, whichever may be our language.
Right.
Not speak baby language back to the child.
Right.
You know? So children can hear the difference. So my niece, whose name is Suchitra, I would say, what's your name? She'll say Suchita. And I'll say, oh, you're Suchita. No, I'm Suchita. She'll say, and I'll say, yeah, you're Suchita. And she gets so angry. Then I say, you're Suchitra. Yeah, now you got it right. You know, now you got it right. They can hear the difference.
Right.
They can't yet pronounce it correctly. So we need not speak baby language to the child. If we speak our language as beautifully as we can,
the child
they'll also pick up that beautiful language. Because you don't want them to use the baby language outside when they are 5 and 6 years old. Now in school, you don't want them to ask the teacher, in Tamil, Nitujana, we say mammu for food. Okay? Mammu sapadlama, we'll ask. But you don't want your son to go to school and tell the teacher, can I have my mammu? You want them to talk properly then. So if you have constantly used the language with children, they'll also speak it. Till you are embarrassed and say, no, don't say such things. So children just absorb. We can talk any word and they'll learn it in time. If there's pronunciation difficult, they'll overcome it in their own time and at their own pace. And I would like to say, so we can speak. Recently, someone asked me, can the children be bilingual even in the government schools? I said they can be any lingual as long as the people are speaking that language. But we don't value the child's learning the spoken language. We want them to be able to write and read. Only then do we think they are masters of that language. But we find that children in English medium schools pick up the English and start writing the letters and words and reading also, eventually. If not, when the parent wants them to do it, they do learn it. That's how we have all perhaps learned it. But in the Montessori environment, we believe that the child needs to enhance and enrich his spoken language. So the first year or so, we focus so much on the spoken language. We have so many activities for the child to be able to hear and also speak, and activities for the child to speak. So we want to enrich that in the child's life. Give him more vocabulary, precise vocabulary, and so on. In fact, our children name geometrical shapes as not only square, circle, and triangle, but also rhombus and parallelogram. I learned what a rhombus was when I came to the Montessori course. So children can even say parallelogram. So it's not, as I said, nothing is difficult. But if we only wait, and we do give them preparatory activities which are rather indirect, they may fold a napkin holding the tips like this, corners like this, or use their writing fingers to do many activities. Some of the Montessori materials have to be held like this. They have to trace geometrical shapes. They have to trace surfaces. All these are indirect preparations which help them to lead them to writing. And then when with all this help, when they write, that's also a sensitive period when they want to write. And writing is when they look around and say, Auntie, can I write light? Sure, go ahead. And they may put light, whatever, L-I-T is light. Spellings may be wrong, but they are writing from their heart. They'll write fan and it will be perfectly spelled.
Yeah. That's
the, what shall we say, the mystery of the English language, where all words are not spelled phonetically, not the child's mistake. It is a language which is like that, which also they will master in time. And they learn to read with joy. Again, a very quick story on the Montessori classroom. One teacher shared with me. I was their advisor, and going every week for the staff meeting, and 2 Fridays in a row, they complained to me, children are not working at all, a group of children sitting around a chowki with a paper and pencil, and they are not working at all. How do we call them away from that? Because they are very clear that that's what they are doing. First Friday, they told me, I said, no, just watch for another week. Second Friday, they told me, no light went on in my head. But that second week, when I went home, I called back and said, what are they doing? What are they doing? They're saying they're looking at things and writing, and they're also asking us, what shall I write? What shall I write? So I told the teachers, you're so privileged to see these children, what Montessori calls explosion into writing. They write and they want to write all the time with no pressure from parents, no pressure from anybody at home to say write A 5 times and write cat 10 times or nothing. They write. So this is what happens when you address the sensitive periods appropriately. Give the right help at the right time. You have prepared the child to hold the pencil. It's not as if you have abandoned the child. You've given all kinds of help where these 3 fingers are strengthened to hold the pencil. So when you actually give them the pencil, they want to try out things. And we show them the use of the pencil as well. Somehow respecting the child's needs, I think. Maybe is the critical phrase there. Respecting the child's needs. That's how it goes on in language.
Wow. So that's that magic, that power that the child has. That's amazing. What about math, ma'am? Dr. Montessori also talks about awakening of the mathematical mind in the child.
Yeah.
So what can we say about that?
I'll quote from someone else, not Montessori.
Sure.
Blaise Pascal, the scientist, the French philosopher and mathematician, said, man's mind was mathematical by nature, and that knowledge and progress came from accurate observation. Man, all human beings have a mathematical mind. Though some of us who did poorly in math in school may say, I missed that. I didn't get it at all. But I think we didn't make use of the opportunities that came our way.
Right.
Or maybe there wasn't a guide who showed us the way. So
maybe a sensitive period we missed.
So here the child is again in a way we very proudly and famously call the Montessori approach to learning as the indirect approach of assistential learning. The teacher's role is to aid. Education, we say, is an aid to life. And in the way I help children learn, it has to be very indirect, so that the child doesn't feel the weight of my hand on his shoulder. He has to feel I learned it myself. So another story before I go on. I had this child called Arjun, and his mother came one day with him next to her, and he said, Uma, you have started showing him to write numbers, is it? Arjun loves writing numbers. He's writing it all the time. I presented him with the arithmetic material, and he was superlative at it. He was very good at it. I mean, what other children may have taken 1 month, he did it in 2-3 days, the various material in the beginning of arithmetic. And I, of course, had stars in my eyes about that. So she said, I said, no, I haven't asked him to write anything. I'm sorry, I haven't asked him to write anything. And I thought maybe you were asking him to write, I said. So she said, no, you told me I shouldn't interfere in any of his learning. I'm not doing anything. So this boy is standing between the two of us and watching us like a tennis match. So then I looked at Arjun and said, Arjun, who taught you how to write numbers? No one. I learned it. And that is the greatest moment for a Montessori teacher. Absolutely. To give up her arrogance completely and say, you didn't teach him anything. He learned it. Right. Arjun is the master who taught me that I was not his teacher. I learned it, he said. And he wrote it beautifully also. So children have the mathematical mind. How do I know when that is? So she says it's around 3.5. Montessori says it doesn't mean exactly when the child is 3.5, around the time.
Right.
Before that, we show them small and big, short and long, or thick and thin, or tall and short, or whatever. We do all kinds of vocabulary building with materials, the sensorial materials in the Montessori classroom. They're quite happy. They'll tell us this is big, or I am bigger than that person, and all that they may use in their language. But suddenly at some point, they may ask you, how many sweets did you give him? Lots. No, how many? And somewhere, either at home or in school, they begin to ask questions to quantify exactly. Right. And not satisfied with this vague answer of one and many. You know, I always say we play games with children where I say babies, 1-year-old, and I say, what's in my hand? And put both my hands and they'll open one hand. And I'll say, oh, nothing, unme illa. Or I'll have 1 sweet in one hand and 2 sweets in the other. And I say, which one do you want? And they'll take the 2. As though they recognize the quantity, no. Right. And also if you ask them, do you want 1 or 2? Most children will say 2.
Right.
But I don't know if you can try with 1 and 5, maybe they'll say 5. But if you say 2 and 5, they may choose 2. 2 is 2 hands full, not 2 sweets.
Yeah.
So they become interested in precisely quantifying. And so around that time, Montessori's arithmetic material are world renowned.
Right.
Any educational traditional system will also say, give us only the Montessori arithmetic material. Children understand foundational concepts so clearly with it, because we give them quantities first to understand what is 2, what is 3, what is compared to 1. And so there are ways in which we help them. At the time, they are interested in quantities.
Right.
And therefore, it's also given in a very systematic manner that the foundation for math is laid very, very clearly. Geometry we may offer earlier because it's more concrete. I can hold a circle in my hand and trace it. But arithmetic we start a little later, a year after they have joined the school, around 3.5. And they, with us, by the time they are 6, they come up even to division.
Right.
With the material. But it takes away their fear from things. Right. Even later on when they have to do it with pen and paper or pencil and paper. There's no fear of that, you know. Right. I've had to tell some children that number won't come back and bite you. No, I'm not good at it, she would say. I say, no, we'll make friends with it. We'll make friends with it. And then the number itself will help you. So because then again, as parents, we often say to the child who doesn't write the numbers in proper sequence, even I could do no arithmetic. I was so poor at arithmetic. That's why you have taken after me and you're poor at it. No, I had to send a note to the parents saying, don't ever say that to your child. Tell her you were brilliant and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of fun learning through the doing.
Yeah.
The experience that helps children face learning joyously when it's offered at the right time with Invina.
Right.
It's extremely important. I think we have few minutes only.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we can come back again. I'll once we finish this. I think we have only 41 seconds left. So
it might just, idea of
yeah, it might just stop, but I'll try to restart it. But just to start off with the next question, maybe you also spoke about this thing about how we brand children about them being arrogant or naughty. So is this again something to do with the sensitive period of maybe order in the child's life?
Yeah.
So could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah. Order again is first external.
I'm extremely sorry. I guess there was a time limit on Insta Live.
Yeah, no, I wasn't watching that there.
No, I think, no, it's nice we get another hour with you.
I'm not sure. Oh God. My apologies to the participants also for going on. Maybe you should have put the comments on briefly so that they could have said, ma'am, your time is up. Please come finish it. Anyway, I do get carried away talking about children.
No, it's nice to hear you. Nice to listen to all the stories. So thank you all for rejoining. So we're going to continue our conversation.
So
I'll turn off the comments again and we'll wait for questions at the end. So
maybe another 10 minutes,
sure.
Ritujana, I should be disciplined, I think.
No,
okay.
Sure. Just to repeat my question, ma'am, I think what I was trying to ask is when we say that the child is being arrogant or being mischievous or naughty or stubborn, is this something to do with the sensitive period? And if it is, then this sensitive period of order, what does it mean? If you could elaborate a little bit. Yeah.
That sensitive period for order is also parallel to language, which is from birth onwards. In order to adapt themselves to this world, to live here, they have to gain knowledge of the world around them. And in that sense, though the world, things keep changing, it cannot grossly change every minute or every day. So in a sense, we need to have a safe and secure environment where the child sees the same people and the same things every day, and he gets used to being carried in a particular way. I'm talking about the infant. Even there's a sense of order. The infant is used to the mother holding with the head on the left hand and put her hand under his back with her right hand, and suddenly the other person does it in the reverse order. Sometimes they'll cry, and then that new person will say, she can recognize me, I'm not Amma, so he or she is crying. But we have seen children who have gone from there. In the south, as you know, girls go home to their mother's house to have the baby. And so the first 3 months may be spent in the maternal grandparents' place. Then after that, on an auspicious day, they'll take the baby to the parents' home or to the in-laws' home. So when that grandmother holds the baby differently or whatever, when the baby cries, you say, see, she's only fond of the other grandmother and not me. After a while, the child will adapt to that also. But that sense of order, and they look at things around them and they may cry because it all looks so strange. So
Right.
just for a few days. In olden days, my grandmother's days, when they went from their mother's house, the village, to their in-laws' village, they carried a fistful of sand. That is the manvasna, the smell of earth, that the mother carried from her mother's home to her in-laws' home and put it under the child's pillow or mattress, so that he got the smell of the earth and believed that he was in the same place, they said. So we all used to laugh about it. But frankly, when I took my grandson was born, although we are paternal grandparents in our home, and when I took him to Bangalore to his parents' home, I took all the pictures off the wall and I went and put it there in his room.
Right.
There. And I would take him around and see, this Yana has come here also, or this yellow flower has come to this house also. It's the same place. I believed I calmed him down and or helped him see that place as a familiar place.
Right.
So order is external also. Order is through the developing relationships with people. So and so is the tata or whoever, and that person does this and this person does something else. And if you change that role, they sometimes get disturbed also. When the child is 2.5 and you take them to the Montessori school, every day Papa takes him to school, drops him and goes to office, and Mama will come at 12 o'clock or whatever and pick him up. One day the father is traveling or going on a tour on work, so the mother brings him to school in the morning and the child refuses to get down from there. And teacher and mother are both agitated and upset. So well settled, why is he crying? And then he thinks if Mama comes in the car, he has to go home, not go to school. So that routine has changed. So those are simple things that order is of extreme importance, and that gives them a sense of security. In our house of children, if we change the position of materials from one shelf to another, we warn the children on Friday that we are going to change it around, because very often the children will come and look around and say, what happened? What happened? Where has everything gone? So they seem to carry in their heads that image very, very clearly. I had one child who got upset because we had the first male entering the classroom, and he was a tailor who was taking measurements for some costume for the children. And he cried, and he said, ask him to go away. I said, he's not going to come anywhere near you. He's only doing it for the other children. We both will go and sit as far away from him as possible. He won't come anywhere near us. I said it also, don't come. We both are sitting there. Cried through that tailor's work, this fellow cried, and next day refused to come to school. Till Umanti promised him that guy will never enter the premises again. Because till then, there were only females in that environment. There were only women teachers, women helpers. There's no one who came and interacted with children like this, touching them and measuring them and all.
Right, yeah.
She had a very, very keen sense of order. It took me another few weeks or so to make him believe me that no tailor will come in again. So there's a heightened sense of order in some children. Some children accept changes a little more easily. But we believe that we have to maintain that order, to nurture that in the child. To nurture that, we are very particular about maintaining order, external as well as in our behavior with children. We have to be consistent. I can't say you can do this now, but you can't do that later. So in that order also, if I say we have to talk softly, we have to talk softly all the time, including me, the teacher. And we can't shout now, just because it's a different time. They don't know time. So we have to be, so if you look at order, it's hugely important. And I think it's a major factor in their formation of their personality. Because that gives them the trust in the environment. Yes. I hope that answers your question.
Right. So I think that's another thing for educators and parents to probably observe and write down in their journals. about looking at the child very objectively and understanding this order so that we don't brand them as being naughty and arrogant and being difficult, right?
Thank
That's
you,
very
Dr.
nice.
Lina.
Yeah.
And also,
So,
it's like we ask parents, how orderly are you at home? Do you leave your
mm,
chappals in the same place, your shoes and socks, the same
mm,
shelf?
mm,
After having tea and coffee, do you put it back in a particular place? Because they're observing you all the time. And if you do that, they'll do it also.
right.
But if one person leaves the chappals outside or in a haphazard manner,
Right.
and child may even though he may not be able to talk, he'll go hold you by your hand and take you there and make you put it in the proper place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very keen sense of order. One corporation school child told me when I was visiting them, held me by the hand, took me into the classroom. Before we entered the classroom, he told me, "Inge, nammala romba mella pesu." We will talk very silently. And through my visit there for the next 20 minutes, he sat next to me to make sure that I wasn't going to break the rule. Though the teacher was embarrassed because she was my student, the child had no embarrassment. He was
Right.
protecting me that I wouldn't break the rules.
Right.
Very nicely done. Very nicely done. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you bring out very beautiful examples of order in the baby, right from
Yeah.
the baby. So if a child is moving to, the next environment, which is a school or, into the education sphere, um, if we align maybe uh, the child's education around these sensitive periods, then it looks like there's a lot of achievement that can happen in a very, very harmonious way. So would you have any anecdotes about this harmony in children, school-going children, in terms of education aligning with the sensitive periods?
Yeah, this child at the end of age 6, I would say, is confident, sure of himself, the sense of self-esteem. They're courageous in their own way, compassionate when other children need help, and articulate to tell us what exactly they want. Identifying their own feelings to say what they want, if we have helped them to do so, And examples would be the first step is one child who said, even in the Montessori house, who told me when I invited him to show him some activity, he said, sorry, no, he said. The first time he said no to me. So I was a bit taken aback. I moved away, which is what Montessori teachers do. And he chose something and went away. The first time I wrote in his report that somewhere he has developed confidence in me and confidence in his own choice of it, that he can handle that and that he needs to do that before he comes and accepts my invitation. So you see this gradual development of these qualities in the children, that just because she's an auntie, I need not always do immediately what she's asking me to do, to run to do just then. But again, in a Chennai Corporation School, the confidence, I want to say, how the child has achieved it, is the teacher, because we had a visitor from abroad and we were taking her to that classroom. They were working in groups. It's an elementary child. Who the teacher said, will you show, we couldn't hear her. She told the child, will you show her some material, arithmetic material, how to work with it? Will you demonstrate to them, the visitors? And the child said something to the teacher, and the teacher smiled, and child went back to her mat. So the teacher came and told her, she says she's just finishing her other work which she has taken up, and once she finishes that, she'll come and show you how to do this. And she smiled. I said, it's not just the child's confidence with you as a teacher, or you, that she can say, let me finish the work that I'm doing and then I'll show you. But it's also the teacher's graciousness or the respect she gave the child and said, let the visitors wait because you have to finish your work. That is true respect of the child. In fact, I applauded the teacher. I said, I'm not surprised at the child, but I think your response was so brilliant, so brilliant. So children, compassion is outstanding, Ritija. When the conditions are, answer their needs, their sensitive periods, the way they respond to that is so heartwarming. I have children who, will be kind to someone else because they feel that at that particular moment, I need this, my friend needs this more than me. To give up something to say, let her do it. And that kind of, and not looking down on other children if they have special needs, being helpful, saying and running to help them, not because that child has asked, but because they think he or she needs that help. In fact, they'll never give extra help. One child I asked, actually, I think maybe she helped bring the material, so I said, maybe you should help him put it back. No, auntie, he can put it back, she said, and walked away. Actually, he couldn't walk, but he could put away the material. It's not being, unhelpful. She knew which kind of help he needed. And so I think we see in various ways this confidence, because, it's the feeling that I have learned, I'm capable of learning, I can do it. And that gives them the confidence to say, I can help you also. Children who have told me after one presentation with an arithmetic material, she came and told me, can I present it to my friend the next day? I said, sure. She said, yes. And I watched her. She did everything that I did. Exactly. And in fact, she didn't have a pen. I had obviously used a pen in writing the numbers. So just before she started writing, she came and asked me, will you give me your pen? So she wrote down the numbers in the pen on the paper, and whatever I had done and said, she did, and helped her friend and do the same activity. So 6 plus. There's a lot of sharing. And this 6 to 12, when they work in groups, the commitment they are making is that the work is considered complete only when every member of the group has completed the work. That's a given rule in that Montessori 6 to 12 environment. So they are not only wanting to finish their work, they are also seeing that the people in their group are enabled to finish their work and not look down because they have been slow, but to see what help they may need to finish it. So it's a harmonious society, both in the 3 to 6 and the 6 to 12. We have to nurture that. We are the facilitators and guides. It's not that it will happen magically, but it's the sensitive period to work in a group. I have to see how I can nurture that. And if we give the right help there, at the right time, in the right manner, then they learn to work very, very harmoniously as a group. And the community then not only is the small group in which they are doing a project, the classroom itself becomes a community, then the school becomes a community where they are so proud to be a member of that community. So it's the words that we often use are respect.
Absolutely.
Respect in listening, respect in responding. And this is from the moment your baby is born and you're holding her in your arms or him in your arms. I think that's the crucial part. And if we only would believe that we are responsible for responding to the sensitive periods, all will be joy. And I would say, as Montessori said, there would be peace through education.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Nitijana.
Thank you, ma'am. On that beautiful note of respect and, giving that right help. And I think we should, I'm lost at words to thank you for this beautiful talk. I think we can open it up for questions, perhaps. Yeah. So I will switch on the comments. Just a second. Yes. So we'll open up the talk for questions. If anybody has any, please either send it in the comment section or maybe in the questions section.
About 10 minutes?
Yes, about 10 minutes. Yep. There we go. Overshot a bit. We can't let you go, I guess. So we have Ashoka saying thanks a lot.
Thank you. I hope it's, what shall I say, useful. Thank you, Kishore. Thanks, Mathura. Ahila.
There is a question. I'll just get that. There's a question from the handle is Nebuchadnezzar. Can we switch from a different system to Montessori after age 5?
I'll answer with a yes. You do need an understanding adult in the classroom, and sometimes children, the older children, when they are given freedom, which they have not experienced earlier in their 3 to 5 school, and suddenly they have the freedom. Initially, there are children who will take advantage of it and maybe not pick up the right things, or want to play, or want to do drawing all the time, or so they may feel at last, now I can do what I want, which I never had earlier. So it's the adult's responsibility to help the child understand that yes, you can do all those things as well, but see, all the others are working. So shall we also learn to work with the material, because you may have to give some introductory material that he has not met earlier. In the sense, the other children would have worked with them in the 3 to 6 environment. I think with a gentle, understanding teacher, it can work. But frankly, I have had children who couldn't settle down there. So rare cases where the parents also felt that maybe he was not getting full optimum use of that. But I would like to say that yes, we can help all children. I'd like to say that. But practically speaking, there may be some difficulties. But don't give up because I said that. Please try. Thank you. Are we done with it?
Ma'am, we have one more. How do we manage the child at 5 with strong will to say no? Are they being very individualistic?
Thank God your child has learned to say no. So the saying no is the use of his willpower, where he or she is choosing to do something which you may not approve of, but it's her willpower that chooses to do that. If it's something dangerous or not safe, of course you can't let her. So you will have to talk to them to say why it's not safe. 5-year-old maybe can understand some explanations, you should. But if you have to listen carefully if it is something that you can let your child do, because saying no, now we may say is adamant or stubborn or whatever that you want to say because she's disobedient, she's saying no to you. But actually she's exercising her willpower. And when she's 15, I'm sure you'll want her to say no to certain things. When her friends invite her to do something which you disapprove of, and she also thinks it's wrong, then she has to have the courage to say no there. I will not do that. They have to know when to say no to things. We can't overnight teach them when they are 13 and 14 that you have to say no. Sometimes we have to experience the no ourselves to say, why is she saying no? So don't take the no as disobedience or a negative word. As I told you, the child said no to my invitation. I didn't take it negatively. I was so proud. At last, he's now saying no to me. Because he's exercising his willpower to do something, which is positive for him. I may not think so, but that's what he's being told from inside, you do this. So if I can trust the child, I think I didn't use that word at all in the last 1 hour. If we can trust our children, they want to do well. They are good children. If you trust your child, you will listen to the no to find out whether you can let them go forward or not. No, I won't have a bath now. Maybe you can wait for 5 minutes or 10 minutes to convince them why the bath has to be had now. If it's not something that's going to cause distress, I don't know what the no is for. You have to figure out. And you have to figure out how to respond to the child rather than react and brand your child as disobedient. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think I've missed a few questions because the comments kept going. But there's this one last one maybe. Montessori child is independent or unique?
Yeah, both. All of us in our, the other word which I did not use at all is the need for independence. Again, from the time the child is born, they want to walk by themselves. When they learn to walk, they will not hold your hands. Being independent is to be able to do it by themselves. So even a very young child, when you offer to do something, they'll say, nane, nane, ape aap, I'll do it. So the need to be independent is there in every human being at any age or stage. I want to be independent is what we see. Even at my age, I don't want to hold anybody's hand to walk. I would rather walk by myself or even use a walking stick. I had an aunt who would have a walking stick which she put under her armpit and walked. So I said, what is that stick doing there? Oh, I have forgotten, she'd say. So you want to be independent. In being independent for a child is very, very important. At different stages, different ways in which they want to be independent. But your child is unique. You are unique. And all of us in this world, we are only one of a kind. Even between you and your siblings, you're not all the same. We are all different. Both of your children are different from each other. Though you are both the same parents, they are different from each other. We are unique. Montessori says we are like handcrafted people and crafted by ourselves.
Right.
Not to blame our parents for who we are or our teachers. We are what we have created. So we have to remember what Arjun said and say, I learned to do it. I made myself who I am. I am unique. I'm not sure if I am independent in everything. I want to be. And children learn to be independent, to walk, to climb stairs, to do whatever it is. There's a real need to be independent. I hope I have answered your question.
So yeah, you have it. Thank you, ma'am, for that. So I guess, yeah, on that note, maybe we can end this session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Uma ma'am, for helping us realize the uniqueness of a child, the trust and faith that we need to have in this child, and the respect, which I know I've learned from you, which is always a two-way street. So I think these insights will help us as educators and parents take this a long way in the right help and the right manner and at the right time. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you all for participating as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all. And I'd just like to say a word that today she asked about independent. I have learned to independently address the Insta Live conversation.
Yes.
So even today, there is a certain level of independence. I'm not sure if it's 100% there, but there is a certain level of
yes.
So all our lives, we strive to be independent. Thank you all for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. All right, bye, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you all once again for coming and signing in for this Insta Live talk. We'll be sharing these videos on our pages, Instagram and Facebook. We are Aroha Montessori Center for Co-Learning on Facebook, and arohamontessori.in on Instagram, as you are aware. Thank you so much. Bye.